Human beings are social creatures, and our position within the social sphere is determined not merely by circumstance, but by the way we present ourselves to the world. Alfred Adler taught that the way we perceive ourselves, our self-worth, our confidence, and our capacity for purpose shapes how others treat us. Until you cease diminishing yourself, until you stop subordinating your value to the expectations or judgments of others, you invite a world that will reflect back that lack of respect. The individual who habitually underestimates their own worth sends an unspoken message: I am less, I am dispensable, I do not matter. Others, whether consciously or unconsciously, respond to that message. Respect, Adler insists, is earned not only through action but through self-recognition. Many people diminish themselves in subtle ways. They apologize unnecessarily, downplay achievements, avoid asserting boundaries, and constantly seek approval. These behaviors, while socially polite on the surface, cultivate a dynamic in which the individual becomes peripheral, overlooked, and undervalued. The social world, operating according to patterns of perceived competence and self-regard, reacts predictably. Those who appear weak or hesitant are marginalized, ignored, or exploited. Adler emphasized that the path to social significance is intertwined with the development of courage, the courage to recognize one's own value and assert one's presence in the community. Self-diminishment is the silent invitation to be treated as less than you are. This phenomenon is rooted in the psychology of inferiority. Adler described the inferiority complex as a condition in which individuals perceive themselves as inadequate or powerless, often comparing themselves unfavorably to others. When the inferiority complex dominates, it manifests in self-effacing behaviors that reinforce others' perception of weakness. The paradox is evident. By internalizing feelings of inadequacy, one not only suffers inwardly, but also projects an aura of vulnerability that encourages disregard or mistreatment. The individual's social standing is compromised not by the actions of others alone, but by the subconscious signals of diminished self-worth. Breaking free from this cycle requires the cultivation of self-respect. Self-respect is not arrogance, nor is it entitlement. It is an acknowledgement of one's inherent value, combined with the courage to assert that value appropriately in social contexts. Adler emphasized that individuals must take responsibility for the image they project. You cannot control every action of others, but you can control how you allow yourself to be perceived. To stop diminishing oneself is to redefine social dynamics. People respond to confidence and clarity of self-assessment with corresponding respect. Furthermore, asserting self-worth reshapes relationships. Those who once took advantage of your hesitance, your apologies, and your timidity will encounter boundaries that cannot be ignored. Respect is not demanded through aggression, but cultivated through the consistent demonstration of personal integrity, competence, and assertiveness. Adler viewed the social world as a stage upon which individuals act in accordance with the signals they emit. Respect, therefore, is as much a reflection of inner conviction as it is a response to external behavior. Adler also warned against the trap of comparing oneself to others in a manner that fuels self-diminishment. Social comparison, when used to belittle oneself, reinforces feelings of inferiority and dependence. Instead, one must orient toward personal goals, contribution to the community, and the cultivation of unique strengths. Social respect follows naturally when the individual operates from a foundation of competence, self-awareness, and purpose. Ultimately, to stop being treated poorly, one must begin with an inward transformation. Self-diminishment is not merely a psychological habit, it is a social signal. By cultivating self-respect, asserting boundaries, and acting with courage and purpose, one not only transforms the self, but transforms the social dynamics that govern human interaction. The world treats you as you allow yourself to be treated. Respect begins with the recognition of your own worth. the way we perceive ourselves is the cornerstone of how the world perceives us. Alfred Adler, the father of individual psychology, emphasized that self-perception is not merely an internal affair. It is a social signal, an unspoken message that communicates to others how they should respond. When an individual diminishes themselves, underestimates their own worth, or constantly apologizes for their existence, they are sending a message to the world that they are insignificant, unworthy, or dispensable. Others, consciously or unconsciously, read these signals and respond accordingly. Human beings are wired to react to cues of competence, confidence, and self-assurance. When these cues are absent, when one's behavior reflects doubt and insecurity, the social environment mirrors this perception with indifference, neglect, or even exploitation. The harsh truth is that respect is often given only in proportion to the value you demonstrate, both internally and externally. Many people diminish themselves without even realizing it. They apologize for speaking up, they downplay achievements, and they defer constantly to the opinions of others. They hesitate to express their desires, shrink from asserting boundaries, and habitually defer their own needs to satisfy those around them. These behaviors, though often socially encouraged as polite or considerate, carry a hidden cost. They erode the perception of personal authority and competence. Adler observed that people respond not just to overt actions, but to the subtle emotional and psychological signals that one emits. By consistently signaling self-doubt, passivity, or inferiority, the individual unwittingly invites others to treat them as less than they are. This dynamic is compounded by the psychology of inferiority. Adler described the inferiority complex as a pervasive feeling of inadequacy or weakness, often developed in early life, that drives self-effacing behavior. Individuals with such complexes habitually compare themselves to others, find themselves lacking, and act in ways that reinforce these feelings. The problem is cyclical. The more one diminishes oneself, the more the social environment reinforces the perception of inadequacy, which in turn deepens internal feelings of inferiority. This self-reinforcing loop creates a world in which the individual is treated with the very disrespect they have, consciously or unconsciously, cultivated. Breaking free from this cycle begins with recognition. To stop being treated poorly, one must first recognize the ways in which self-diminishing behaviors communicate weakness. Awareness is the first step toward change. Understanding that self-perception shapes social response empowers the individual to take responsibility for the signals they emit. Adler argued that courage, the courage to assert one's inherent worth, is essential. By aligning internal self-perception with external presentation, one communicates strength, competence, and dignity. Ultimately, the world mirrors the self-image you project. If you shrink, apologize, and undervalue yourself, the social environment will treat you as insignificant. Conversely, if you recognize your inherent value, assert your boundaries, and project confidence, the world responds in kind. Respect begins within. It is first cultivated in the mind and heart, and then expressed in every action, every word, and every interaction. Until you stop diminishing yourself, people will continue to treat you as if you are less than you truly are. Many people diminish themselves through seemingly small behaviors that, over time, carry profound consequences for how they are perceived. Alfred Adler emphasized that these behaviors, constant apologies, over-explaining, excessive politeness, and relentless approval seeking, are not harmless acts of humility, but signals to the social world that one lacks authority, competence, and self-worth. Each time a person apologizes unnecessarily, they are telling others that their presence is burdensome. Each time they downplay accomplishments, they communicate that their contributions are unworthy of recognition. Over time, these subtle behaviors accumulate, forming a pattern that others cannot help but notice. shaping how they respond. Politeness and humility, when unbalanced by self-respect, create the impression that the individual is peripheral, dispensable, and easy to overlook or manipulate. Approval seeking, in particular, is a behavior that reinforces social devaluation. People who habitually defer to others' opinions or adjust their actions to gain acceptance are projecting uncertainty about their own judgment. Adler observed that individuals who lack internal validation inevitably rely on external approval, which places them at the mercy of others' perceptions. When self-worth is externally sourced, the social environment assumes authority over the individual's identity. This dynamic often leads to exploitation, manipulation, or passive dismissal, as others unconsciously take advantage of the apparent insecurity. A person who constantly seeks validation signals vulnerability, and human social instincts often interpret vulnerability as an invitation to assert dominance or superiority. Avoiding boundaries is another subtle yet powerful form of self-diminishment. People who fail to assert limits allow others to overstep, often tolerating behaviors that erode their dignity or autonomy. Adler emphasized that boundaries communicate personal value. Those who maintain them project self-respect, while those who do not appear weak or secondary. The absence of boundaries signals to others that it is acceptable to disregard one's needs, desires, or comfort. Over time, this pattern teaches the social environment that the individual's preferences are negotiable, malleable, or irrelevant, reinforcing patterns of disrespect and exploitation. Over-explaining is yet another behavior that diminishes perceived authority. When a person feels compelled to justify every action or decision, it communicates insecurity and a lack of confidence. Adler believed that self-assurance is silently persuasive. Those who act with quiet confidence are respected, while those who over-explain invite scrutiny and judgment. Over-explaining stems from the fear of being misunderstood or rejected, but it paradoxically undermines credibility, signaling indecision or weakness. In essence, these behaviors, apologizing excessively, seeking constant approval, avoiding boundaries, and over-explaining, form a pattern of self-diminishment that others inevitably detect. Adler argued that human beings respond to subtle psychological cues as much as overt actions. If the mind signals low self-worth, others will unconsciously mirror that perception, treating the individual as less capable, less important, or less deserving of respect. Changing this pattern begins with awareness and deliberate action. Recognizing these behaviors and understanding their social consequences allows one to project confidence, assertiveness, and self-respect. The inferiority complex is at the heart of why individuals diminish themselves and invite disrespect from others. Alfred Adler explained that this psychological phenomenon arises from early experiences of perceived weakness, inadequacy, or rejection. When a person internalizes feelings of inferiority, they develop a persistent sense that they are less competent, less valuable, or less capable than others. These feelings are not merely internal struggles. They shape behavior, communication, and social presence in ways that subtly, yet powerfully, signal weakness to the outside world. A person who believes themselves inferior will unconsciously act in ways that reinforce that belief, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of diminished self-worth and social devaluation. Individuals with an inferiority complex often engage in behaviors aimed at avoiding exposure of their perceived deficiencies. They may defer excessively to others, avoid leadership or responsibility, and suppress opinions or desires that might invite judgment. Adler noted that such behaviors, while intended to protect the self from criticism or failure, have the unintended effect of weakening social presence. Others perceive hesitation, avoidance, and self-effacement as evidence of inadequacy. Over time, this reinforces the initial feelings of inferiority. The social environment responds in alignment with the signals the individual emits, creating a mirror that reflects the very lack of respect they fear. This psychological pattern extends to the interpretation of social interactions. Individuals with an inferiority complex often assume that neutral or ambiguous actions from others are negative judgments. A casual remark may be interpreted as criticism, a delay in response as rejection, or a differing opinion as a personal attack. Adler emphasized that this distorted perception not only exacerbates internal feelings of inadequacy, but also influences outward behavior. By overreacting or withdrawing, the individual inadvertently creates social dynamics that confirm their fears of being undervalued or disregarded. In essence, the inferiority complex not only shapes internal experience, but also molds the social reality around the individual. Moreover, the inferiority complex fosters dependency on external validation. When self-worth is not grounded internally, individuals constantly seek reassurance from others to compensate for their feelings of insufficiency. This dependency communicates vulnerability to those around them, which can invite exploitation or dismissal. Adler observed that people respond intuitively to signals of dependence and insecurity. Those who appear overly reliant or uncertain are less likely to be treated with respect. By failing to establish self-sufficiency and inner confidence, the individual reinforces the perception of being less than, perpetuating cycles of diminished social standing. Overcoming the inferiority complex requires deliberate psychological work and self-awareness. Recognizing how internalized feelings of inadequacy influence outward behavior is the first step. Adler emphasized that individuals must confront these beliefs, understand their origins, and gradually cultivate self-confidence and competence. By developing a realistic sense of personal value and aligning behavior with this internal recognition, one communicates strength, authority, and dignity to the social world. Respect, Adler asserts, is not granted merely by circumstance. It is elicited by the confidence and clarity with which one carries oneself. Ultimately, the inferiority complex is a psychological lens that distorts both self-perception and social reality. By diminishing oneself, the individual signals weakness and invites disrespect. The remedy lies in awareness, self-acceptance, and deliberate cultivation of self-worth, transforming internal beliefs into behaviors that command respect rather than surrender it. Cultivating self-respect is the pivotal step in transforming how the world treats you. Alfred Adler emphasized that self-respect is not a superficial display of confidence or arrogance, but a deep recognition of one's inherent value and the courage to act in accordance with it. When an individual acknowledges their worth internally, this awareness naturally manifests in behavior, posture, speech, and decision-making. Others, consciously or unconsciously, respond to these signals. Respect, Adler argued, is as much a reflection of internal conviction as it is a reaction to external achievement. It begins within, radiates outward, and shapes the social environment. Self-respect requires an honest assessment of one's strengths and limitations. It is not a denial of imperfection, nor is it a refusal to learn. Rather, it is the acknowledgement that every individual possesses intrinsic dignity and unique contributions. When someone acts from this place of self-assurance, they project stability and authority. Conversely, when self-worth is undervalued, even minor errors or hesitations are magnified in the social perception, reinforcing patterns of disrespect. Adler observed that the individual who knows their value does not need to seek constant approval. Their behavior communicates competence, boundaries, and self-assurance naturally, inviting others to respond in kind. One practical expression of self-respect is the consistent assertion of boundaries. Boundaries are not walls of isolation, but markers of personal integrity. They demonstrate that one's needs, desires, and limits are recognized and honored. When boundaries are upheld, others learn to treat the individual with consideration and dignity. Conversely, failure to assert limits signals that one is malleable or secondary, often leading to exploitation, disregard, or manipulation. Adler stressed that the social world instinctively recognizes and reacts to these cues. Self-respect begets respect from others, while self-neglect encourages diminished treatment. Another dimension of cultivating self-respect is embracing responsibility for one's actions and choices. Adler's psychology emphasized that individuals are responsible not only for their successes, but also for the perception they create in the social sphere. Blaming external circumstances or relying solely on external validation erodes self-respect and reinforces social devaluation. By accepting responsibility for one's life and actively shaping one's social presence, an individual demonstrates both competence and integrity, qualities that naturally elicit respect. Furthermore, self-respect empowers individuals to pursue goals and express opinions without fear of judgment. The person who acts from self-awareness and conviction does not shrink in the presence of disagreement or criticism. Adler argued that courage is inseparable from self-respect. To stand firm in one's convictions, to assert one's worth, and to act purposefully, even in the face of social pressure, is the essence of commanding respect. Ultimately, cultivating self-respect transforms internal psychology into social reality. It aligns perception with action, strengthens boundaries, and communicates inherent value. When one stops diminishing oneself and begins to recognize personal worth, the social world responds accordingly. Respect, Adler teaches, is not granted passively. It is actively elicited through the consistent projection of self-recognition, courage, and integrity. Setting boundaries is one of the most essential practices for ensuring that others treat you with respect. Alfred Adler emphasized that boundaries are not merely defensive walls but active expressions of self, worth, and personal integrity. When an individual consistently enforces limits, they communicate to the social world that their time, energy, and emotions are valuable. Conversely, failing to establish boundaries sends a subtle signal that one's needs and dignity are negotiable, inviting disregard, manipulation, or exploitation. Boundaries define the space in which respect can exist. Without them, respect cannot flourish because the individual has not made it clear that it is expected and deserved. Many people struggle with boundaries because of fear of conflict, fear of rejection, or fear of appearing selfish. Adler noted that these fears are often rooted in an inferiority complex or a history of conditional acceptance, where love, attention, or approval was granted only when the individual subordinated their own needs. As a result, people may tolerate behavior that diminishes their value, acquiesce to unreasonable demands, or allow others to overstep personal limits. Over time, these habits reinforce social dynamics in which the individual is marginalized or treated as secondary. What begins as an attempt to avoid conflict ironically invites ongoing disrespect, because people instinctively respond to signals of acquiescence and passivity. Effective boundaries are both clear and consistent. Clarity ensures that others understand what is acceptable and what is not, reducing ambiguity that could be exploited. Consistency reinforces the message that respect is not negotiable and must be honored over time. Adler emphasized that boundary setting is not about punishment or control. It is about cultivating a social environment in which dignity is preserved. By asserting limits, an individual teaches others how they wish to be treated, and this guidance shapes behavior more effectively than complaints or resentment alone ever could. Boundaries also serve an internal function. They reinforce self-respect by providing a tangible demonstration of personal value. Every time one enforces a limit, saying no to unreasonable demands, prioritizing personal needs, or refusing to tolerate disrespect, the individual affirms their own worth. Adler believed that social respect cannot be divorced from internal respect. The social environment mirrors the self-image one projects. Boundaries make that self-image visible, transforming abstract confidence into observable action. Furthermore, boundaries enhance relationships rather than weaken them. By clearly communicating expectations, individuals reduce misunderstandings and create interactions based on mutual recognition rather than assumption. Respectful engagement emerges naturally when both parties understand and honor each other's limits. Those who once tested or overstepped boundaries are guided toward appropriate behavior, while individuals gain a sense of empowerment and agency. Ultimately, boundaries are the practical embodiment of self-respect. They allow an individual to navigate the social world with clarity, authority, and dignity. Until one learns to set and enforce boundaries, others will continue to treat them as expendable or secondary. By establishing limits firmly and consistently, one signals unmistakably that they are worthy of respect, creating both internal and external transformation in the dynamics of human interaction. Avoiding harmful social comparisons is a critical step in cultivating self-worth and commanding respect, a principle Alfred Adler emphasized throughout his work. Human beings have a natural tendency to measure themselves against others, to evaluate their value and competence based on the achievements, possessions, or social standing of those around them. While comparison can occasionally inspire growth, when used to diminish oneself, it becomes a destructive force. Constantly measuring oneself against others and perceiving oneself as inferior feeds feelings of inadequacy, reinforces self-diminishing behavior, and signals to the social environment that one is unworthy of respect. Adler observed that unhealthy social comparisons are often rooted in an inferiority complex. Individuals with such complexes habitually focus on perceived deficiencies rather than strengths, magnifying the achievements of others while minimizing their own. This mindset fosters resentment, envy, and self-deprecation, all of which erode self-respect. When a person habitually measures themselves against others in this negative way, their behavior communicates insecurity and weakness. They may defer excessively, apologize unnecessarily, or overcompensate in ways that appear desperate for validation. Others, whether consciously or unconsciously, pick up on these cues and respond in kind, often by diminishing, ignoring, or exploiting the individual. Moreover, social comparisons often distort perception, causing individuals to misjudge their true abilities and contributions. Someone who constantly compares themselves to more accomplished peers may overlook their unique strengths, undervalue their achievements, and feel perpetually inadequate. Adler emphasized that this distorted self-perception is not only psychologically damaging but also socially detrimental. When an individual projects insecurity and inferiority, the social environment mirrors these cues, perpetuating cycles of disrespect and marginalization. The remedy, according to Adler, lies in redirecting focus from external validation to internal growth and purpose. Instead of measuring oneself against the achievements of others, one should measure progress relative to personal goals, values, and capacities. This approach fosters self-confidence, self-respect, and a clear sense of identity. By cultivating awareness of one's unique contributions and focusing on self-improvement rather than comparison, individuals project competence and stability. These signals encourage others to respond with respect rather than exploitation. Furthermore, Adler stressed that avoiding harmful social comparisons strengthens relationships. When individuals stop measuring themselves against others, they interact with peers from a place of authenticity rather than insecurity. Relationships shift from competition and judgment to mutual respect and cooperation. Others sense confidence and self-assurance, which encourages reciprocity, trust, and acknowledgement of one's worth. Ultimately, the act of ceasing harmful comparisons is both an internal and external transformation. Internally, It fosters self-recognition, confidence, and psychological stability. Externally, it alters the dynamics of social interaction, signaling to others that the individual is grounded, competent, and worthy of respect. By focusing on personal growth and unique strengths rather than perceived deficiencies in comparison to others, one creates a foundation of self-respect that commands recognition in all areas of life. Ultimately, the respect we receive from others is a reflection of the value and confidence we project internally. Alfred Adler emphasized that social interactions are a mirror of self-perception. People respond not only to our words and actions, but also to the subtle psychological signals we emit. When an individual consistently underestimates themselves, apologizes unnecessarily, avoids asserting boundaries, or seeks external validation, these behaviors communicate vulnerability and insecurity. Others, whether consciously or unconsciously, perceive these signals and treat the individual in ways that reinforce the very patterns of disrespect they fear. Conversely, when a person embodies self-recognition, asserts their worth, and maintains internal confidence, the social environment responds with acknowledgement, consideration, and respect. Self-respect is not merely a private state of mind, but a social instrument. Adler believed that individuals cannot passively expect respect to be granted. It must be elicited through consistent demonstration of personal integrity, competence, and confidence. Every interaction, no matter how small, becomes an opportunity to project inner value outwardly. When one speaks with clarity, acts with purpose, and maintains composure even under pressure, these behaviors communicate that one's presence, opinions, and contributions are significant. Others intuitively sense and respond to this, adjusting their behavior to align with the projected strength. The cultivation of self-respect involves both awareness and deliberate action. Awareness allows an individual to recognize patterns of behavior that diminish social standing: excessive apologizing, constant approval, seeking, over-explaining, or tolerating disrespect. Deliberate action transforms this awareness into change, asserting boundaries, valuing personal achievements, and responding to others from a position of confidence. Adler emphasized that the consistency of these behaviors is critical. Respect is reinforced not by occasional acts of assertion, but by sustained patterns that communicate stability and reliability. Furthermore, internal confidence fosters resilience in social interactions. Those who are grounded in their self-worth are less likely to be swayed by criticism, manipulation, or social pressure. They maintain dignity even when faced with opposition, conveying a sense of authority that naturally commands respect. Adler observed that people are drawn to and influenced by those who exhibit equilibrium, competence, and self-recognition, whereas insecurity and self-doubt invite disregard. This principle also extends to leadership and influence. Individuals who demonstrate internal strength and clarity of purpose are often accorded positions of authority and trust. By projecting self-respect, they cultivate social environments in which fairness, acknowledgement, and cooperation prevail. Conversely, failure to cultivate inner respect results in dynamics of exploitation, marginalization, and undervaluation. Ultimately, the respect of others begins with the self. Until individuals recognize and honor their own worth, they cannot expect the social world to do so. Adler teaches that respect is a product of internal confidence, manifested outwardly, through behavior, boundaries, communication, and the consistent projection of value. People treat us in the measure that we treat ourselves, and only by cultivating unwavering self-recognition can we transform the social world from a mirror of neglect into one of acknowledgement and esteem.